Picture it, the sun beating down on white sandy beaches, palm trees swaying in the warm breeze, and tourists flocking to Florida for some fun in the sun. But beneath the surface of the crystal clear water lies a whole other world, one of mysterious and breathtaking underwater caverns. It's no wonder that cave diving is a popular pastime in the state, with divers from all over the globe coming to explore the depths. But this treacherous activity is not without its dangers, as two college students from Florida would soon discover in July of 1992. This is the story of their terrifying descent into the unknown. Get ready to hold your breath and dive into the unknown as you discover the rich history, the advancements, and the tragedies that lie beneath the Florida surface. Alachua Sink, located in Alachua, Florida, may have been renamed to Mill Creek Sink in 2003, but many divers and locals still refer to it by its original name. This sinkhole holds a rich history for cave divers, as it's the only known access point to the underground Mill Creek stream. The sink is located at the bottom of a 50-foot, nearly vertical cliff edge, and the debris of fallen trees and bushes make the water at the surface a constant murky green color. It may not seem appealing or inviting at first glance, but appearances can be deceiving. Once a diver enters the Alachua Sink and makes their way through the sinkhole, the water begins to clear out, revealing a beautiful cave system. Alachua Sink was first explored by none other than the famous cave divers Sheck Exley and Court Smith, who mapped and published the sinkhole for others to follow. Accessing the sinkhole is no easy feat. In the 1980s, divers had to tie a rope around a nearby tree and rappel in with over 100 pounds of gear on their backs. And that's just the beginning. Once in the water, divers must descend to a depth of 130 feet before reaching the bottom, where the main cave system splits into two tunnels, one leading upstream against the flow and the other downstream with the flow. Visibility can be extremely poor depending on the weather and the amount of debris that has fallen into the sink. Divers may have to wait a few days for visibility to improve, and even on good days, it typically doesn't get better until a diver enters one of the tunnels. Each pathway is filled with caverns that can reach as deep as 227 feet. Diving below 20 to 30 feet increases the risk of exploration for inexperienced divers, as decompression stops are needed to expel dissolved nitrogen in the diver's bloodstream as they surface. Failing to do so can bring on the bends, which can be painful and in extreme cases lead to death. Brace yourself for a dive into the unknown, where danger lurks around every corner and visibility is next to none. The Alachua Sink is not for the faint of heart, as simply losing the line can lead to a catastrophic situation. This is a cave that's reserved for the most experienced divers, those with over 100 cave dives post-certification and a guide by their side. These strict rules were established after a tragic event that took place in July 1992. It's a story that will make your heart race and test your courage. Meet Lance Crawford, a 23-year-old thrill seeker and University of Florida agriculture student. He was always drawn to exploring the great outdoors and had recently obtained his cave diving certification. Eager to test his limits, Lance had heard of the challenges and dangers of the Alachua sinkhole and knew it was the ultimate test for him. He loved activities like skydiving and shark hunting and was always looking for new and exciting challenges. So it's no surprise that he would develop an interest in cave diving, and the Alachua sinkhole was calling his name. It was a sinister and starry night on July 24th when Lance and his diving partner set out to conquer the treacherous Alachua sinkhole. His friend, like Lance, was also a newly certified cave diver, and the two were determined to reach the depths of the Mill Creek stream. While Lance's partner's identity remains unknown, for the sake of this story, we're going to call him John. The duo found the sinkhole and lugged their gear 50 feet down a steep incline, using a rope tied to a tree to slowly lower themselves. The clock was ticking as they entered the water, with the stars shining brightly above. But as they dove in, they were met with poor visibility due to recent rains and could only see about 6 inches in front of them. It was going to be a challenging dive, but the thrill of the unknown was calling them. As the two divers prepared to plunge into the depths of the Alachua sinkhole, an eerie feeling of unease washed over John. The conditions were poor. and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was not as excited as Lance, and deep down, he didn't feel safe. They both knew they were underexperienced for this cave, and the warning signs were there. But Lance was filled with excitement at the thought of what lay beneath. He loved diving and was eager to take on the challenge, regardless of the conditions. He had a carefree attitude, almost as if he didn't believe the dive could be dangerous. Despite John's reluctance, they both slid on their masks and submerged themselves into the unknown. It's important to note that a dive line is not normally set up at the entrance of a cave. This is to make sure that recreational divers don't enter a cave by accident. But for Lance, this dive was far from an accident. It was a calculated risk and an exhilarating adventure. As Lance and John dove deeper into the Alachua sinkhole, the visibility only got worse. A dive line was almost mandatory to even begin the dive due to the poor visibility. Once they identified the dive line, they followed it deeper into the depths. After moving down the first room, they entered a 300 to 400 foot wide open room called Crawfish Heaven. But as they continued, the visibility only got worse, making it difficult to even see the walls that surrounded them. With only a few minutes into the dive, John's doubts began to grow. The risks were extremely high, with no sign of reprieve. He honestly had no desire to continue and didn't see the point in pushing himself further. The exact position of Lance and John at this moment is unclear. It's not even clear if they were on the same guideline. But what is clear is that both divers were near each other, with John either ahead of Lance or on a separate line. John, feeling uneasy about the dive and continuing, would try to locate Lance, but again the visibility was so poor it was challenging to keep sight of each other. As John turned to search for Lance, he couldn't spot him. With the already high level of nerves, John knew he had to keep calm, which was easier said than done. He was panicking deep down. Nevertheless, he quit moving deeper into the cave. He searched the water all around him for a sign from Lance. Over and over his hands reached out, but every time they returned empty. John was careful and meticulous in order not to silt out the water even further, but with the current visibility, it was almost impossible not to make a mistake. He didn't know at the time how long he had been searching for Lance, but would later find out he had spent over an hour searching through the silt, barely able to see his hands reaching out in front of him. It was a desperate search, one that would push him to the brink of his limits, but he was determined to find his diving partner and bring him back to safety. As the minutes ticked by, John's frustration and fear grew. He knew he had to turn back and make his way to the surface. He turned himself around with the help of the guideline and began to slowly swim back, all the while keeping a vigilant eye out for Lance, feeling in all directions as far as his arms would extend. It didn't take long for him to resurface, as they had not ventured too far into the cave. Once he was above water, John quickly got out of the sink and took a moment to examine the water. He searched for bubbles, any sign of air escaping that could have been coming from Lance's oxygen tanks, but just like under the surface, he saw nothing. The realization of the situation began to hit him, as his stomach turned over with dread. He was beginning to lose hope. This was a race against time, a desperate search for his diving partner in the face of impossible odds. As the night wore on, the situation grew increasingly dire. The Alachua police were contacted and informed of the situation, and they immediately called on the cave diver recovery team at Jenny Springs to assist. A team of 10 highly experienced cave divers responded to the call and quickly gathered their equipment. The sink was constantly monitored in case Lance resurfaced, but as the night continued, the mood became more grim. If Lance had somehow survived, he should have resurfaced by now, and along with the fact that no air bubbles had been spotted, their chances were dwindling. Led by Jared Jablonski, all 10 divers entered the water at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, almost 11 hours after Lance and John had originally entered the sink. The entire day was spent looking for any sign of Lance, but there was none. Progress was gruelingly slow for everyone, as divers struggled to venture far due to the poor visibility. Rainfall only added more debris to the sink, making the rescue more dangerous than it already was. Divers could only see about a foot in front of themselves in the murky water. The search continued over the next few days in a painfully slow manner, for all those who anxiously waited for news of Lance. The Alachua sink's conditions did not improve through the search, almost as if the sink was deliberately disturbing those searching for answers. As the days passed, the expectation of a body recovery became the primary concern. In total, 50 divers helped with the search, which continued to span over the weekend and into the following week. When Monday came around, morale was at an all-time low, and the team had been searching for 2.5 days now, with no sign of Lance. All news outlets at this point were reporting that Lance was most likely dead inside the cave. But then, in the late afternoon, a glimmer of hope emerged. A diver was searching along the wall in the crawfish heaven room when he noticed an indentation in the wall forming a lip formation. It was there that Lance Crawford was found. The scene was painful to find and diagnose, as it was clear Lance had struggled until his last breath. All of his gear was still attached, although his mouthpiece was not in his mouth. From where his body was positioned, it was apparent that Lance was looking for the exit but had no visibility in the cave. He must have fought with all his might, adrenaline pumping through his veins as he frantically searched for a way out, crawling along the wall with no guideline. The small indentations along the walls can easily deceive the mind, leading one to mistake the lip formation as an opening, just like Lance did. In his panic state with no visibility, he wedged himself deeper and deeper into the formation, believing it would lead to freedom. But the restriction only grew tighter and tighter, with no escape. His body was stuck deep within the wedge, making it impossible for easy removal, and his death would ultimately be ruled as a drowning. Divers worked tirelessly through the night to finally retrieve his body, their efforts hindered by the limited space and poor visibility. He was lost to the depths until midday on Tuesday, when his body was finally recovered. That's a haunting reminder of the challenges faced by the rescue team and a tragic end to a daring and adventurous journey. But this story is not just about loss. It's a heart-wrenching tribute to Lance Crawford's memory and the valuable lessons that can be learned from his experience. It serves as a reminder to take every dive seriously, to never push ourselves past high-risk conditions, and to always trust our gut instincts. It's impossible to say if Lance could have done something differently to save himself, but it's clear that if he and his diving partner had more experience, they would not have attempted to dive in the treacherous conditions of Alachua Sink. And perhaps they both would have made it out alive that dreadful night. Let Lance's story be a cautionary tale and a reminder to always dive safely. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching this, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.